The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the sounds of 1,000 different species. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the human delegation podium, his hands steady despite the weight of what was about to happen. Around him, the curved walls rose up like an amphitheater, filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some had scales that shimmered under the artificial lights. Others floated in gas-filled chambers or perched on crystalline platforms that hummed with energy. Jake looked down at his notes one last time. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. 3 years of research, planning, and hope that maybe this time would be different. Dr. Lisa Carter sat behind him in the human section, her face calm but her eyes showing the exhaustion of someone who had fought this battle too many times. Next to her, Admiral Ben Hughes adjusted his uniform and checked his tablet, reviewing the same proposal they had submitted every year for the past decade. The Zilani Empire representative rose from his floating platform. His voice carried across the chamber through the translation devices that hung like silver orbs throughout the space. The proposal from the human delegation regarding medical research funding has been reviewed by the appropriate committees. We find their approach primitive. The word hit Jake like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard it before: primitive, backward, emotional, the same words that followed humanity wherever they went in this galaxy. The humans propose using biological solutions for medical treatments, the Zilani continued, his tone suggesting he was discussing something distasteful. Their research into cross-species healing relies on organic compounds and natural processes. We have synthetic alternatives that are far more reliable and efficient. Dr. Lisa Carter shifted in her seat. Jake knew she was thinking about the thousands of hours she had spent studying how different species healed from injuries and diseases. Her work had saved lives across dozens of worlds, but none of that seemed to matter here. The Korthek Trade Federation representative spoke next. His mechanical voice grated through the chamber like grinding metal. The human medical approach lacks the precision of our technological solutions. Their biological sciences are based on guesswork and intuition rather than proper computational analysis. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Guesswork and intuition. They called it that because humans could see patterns that their computers missed. They could find solutions that worked even when the mathematics said they shouldn't. But explaining that too. A species that valued only logic and calculation was like teaching poetry to a machine. More representatives spoke, each adding their voice to the growing rejection of humanity's proposal. The Crystalline Collective found human medicine too messy and unpredictable. The methane breathers of Titan 7 questioned whether humans had the intellectual capacity for advanced research. Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin. Of human participation in galactic science, Admiral Ben Hughes leaned forward when his turn came to respond. His voice was steady and professional, even though Jake could see the anger burning in his eyes. The human approach to medicine has proven effective in situations where synthetic treatments have failed. Our biological sciences complement technological solutions rather than replacing them. The chamber filled with the sounds that various species made when they were dismissive. Clicks, whistles, electronic buzzes, and wet slapping noises that the translation devices couldn't properly convert to human understanding. The message was clear enough without translation. The Vorthan hegemony representative stood, his massive form casting a shadow across several rows of delegates. Perhaps humans would be better served focusing on areas more suited to their capabilities. Manual labor and basic resource extraction require less sophisticated thinking than medical research. The words hung in the chamber like a poison cloud. Jake felt Dr. Carter's sharp intake of breath behind him. Admiral Hughes's hands clenched into fists on the table. Senator Amy Jackson, sitting at the far end of the human delegation, slowly reached for her communication device. Jake had prepared for this moment, but actually living it felt different than he had imagined. The casual dismissal, the assumption that humans were only good for the jobs that other species didn't want to do, the complete disregard for everything humanity had contributed to galactic civilization. The vote came quickly. The massive display screen showed the tally as it updated in real time. Green lights for approval, red lights for rejection, yellow for abstention. The screen filled with red as species after species voted against human participation in the upcoming Andromeda expedition. The final count appeared: 847 votes against, 1 vote in favor, 23 abstentions. Only the small delegation from the peaceful traders of Kepler 442 had voted in favor of including humans in the expedition. The abstentions came from species that didn't care enough to voice an opinion either way. Jake looked at the screen for a long moment, then gathered his papers. The chamber began to fill with the sounds of delegates preparing to move on to the next item of business. To them, this was just another bureaucratic decision. To humanity, it was the final proof that they would never be accepted as equals in this galaxy. He stood and walked to the central speaking platform. The chamber gradually quieted as delegates realized he was going to make a statement. Some of them looked annoyed, as if humans had already taken up too much of their valuable time. "The human delegation withdraws our petition," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system. "Furthermore, Earth hereby suspends all participation in Galactic Council activities effective immediately." The chamber remained quiet for a moment, then filled with what Jake assumed were the various species' versions of confused murmuring. The Zelani representative's platform drifted closer to the speaking area. "Surely the human delegation doesn't mean to withdraw from the council entirely," he said, though his tone suggested he wouldn't be particularly upset if they did. "This is simply one proposal among many. There will be other opportunities." Jake looked up at the floating alien, then let his gaze sweep across the entire chamber. Hundreds of species, thousands of individuals, all of whom had just made it clear that humanity had no place among them as equals. "We mean exactly what we said," Jake replied. "Humanity is withdrawing from all Galactic Council activities. We will honor existing trade agreements until they expire, but we will not be renewing them. We will not be submitting new proposals. We will not be participating in joint ventures or collaborative projects." The chamber erupted in sounds of surprise and confusion. Some delegates seemed pleased, others appeared concerned about the economic implications, and a few looked genuinely puzzled by the human reaction. Dr. Carter stood and joined Jake at the podium. Admiral Hughes followed, as did Senator Jackson and the rest of the human delegation. They moved with quiet dignity, gathering their materials and preparing to leave. "If I may ask," called out a voice from the upper tiers of the chamber, "what does humanity intend to do instead?" Jake paused at the edge of the platform and looked back at the assembled delegates. For a moment, he considered telling them about the projects that human scientists had been working on in secret. About the breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel that went beyond anything the galaxy currently used. About the deep space exploration missions that had already identified potential new homes for humanity. Instead, he simply said, "We intend to find our own path." The human delegation walked out of the chamber together, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind them, the Galactic Council sat in confusion, unsure of how to process what had just happened. Most of them assumed this was another example of human emotional instability, a tantrum that would be forgotten within a few cycles. None of them noticed Senator Jackson's fingers moving quickly across her communication device as they walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime Station. None of them paid attention to the coded message that went out to every human colony, every human ship, every human installation across the galaxy. The message was simple: Protocol Exodus, Phase 1 begins now. By the time the Galactic Council had moved on to their next item of business, the message had reached the farthest human settlements. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to truly walk away. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and across the galaxy humans moved like ghosts, preparing to vanish. The message had reached every corner of human space, from the mining stations in the outer rim to the research facilities orbiting distant stars. Protocol Exodus was not a plan born of anger or revenge, but something far more dangerous to the galaxy's stability. It was a plan born of careful preparation and quiet Determination. Danny Wright wiped the sweat from his forehead as he supervised the final extraction operations on Kepler 442. The mining station had been humanity's responsibility for over 30 years, pulling rare minerals from the planet's core that kept half the galaxy's technology running. The Crystalline Collective, who owned the operation, never bothered to learn the technical details, content to let humans handle the dangerous work while they collected the profits. "How much longer until the last shipment is ready?" asked Maria. Santos, the station's chief engineer. She was checking readings on a tablet that showed extraction rates had increased dramatically over the past few months. 3 more days, Danny replied, watching as massive drilling machines pulled glowing ore from deep beneath the planet's surface. "We're pulling up everything we can reach. The collective wants record yields this quarter." What the Crystalline Collective didn't know was that Danny and his team were following very specific instructions. They were extracting not just the valuable minerals, but also the stabilizing elements that kept the planet's core from collapsing. In 6 months, the mining tunnels would cave in, making further extraction impossible without completely rebuilding the operation from scratch. "Transfer requests are coming in faster now," Maria said, showing Danny her tablet. "Another 12 humans requested reassignment to Earth projects this week. The collective barely notices as long as the work gets done." Danny nodded and watched as a transport ship lifted off from the station's landing platform. It was officially carrying minerals to the processing centers, but Danny knew it also carried 3 human families who had finished their contracts and decided not to renew. The Crystalline Collective would assume they had simply found better jobs elsewhere, halfway across the galaxy. Dr. Kate Williams was having her own quiet conversation with the alien administrators at Sanctuary Station. The massive trade hub served dozens of species and handled medical emergencies for ships traveling the busy trade routes. Kate had run the medical bay for 8 years, building a reputation for solving problems that stumped other doctors. "I'm afraid we're operating with reduced staff this month," Kate explained to Zethira, the Zilani administrator who oversaw station operations. "Several of our doctors have been reassigned to Earth medical projects." Zethira's crystalline features showed mild annoyance. "This is the 3rd month you've mentioned staffing issues. Are Earth's medical needs really so pressing that they require our best doctors?" Kate smiled politely while encrypting another batch of medical research files. "The Earth Colonial Medical Council is expanding their deep space hospital program. They need experienced doctors who understand alien physiology." What she didn't mention was that the Deep Space Hospital program was actually a cover for establishing medical facilities in star systems that weren't on any galactic charts. Every piece of research data, every treatment protocol, every breakthrough that Kate and her team had developed was being quietly transferred to secure human networks. "I suppose we can manage with synthetic medical systems for routine cases?" Zethira said, though he sounded uncertain. "The Zilani medical technology should be sufficient for most situations." Kate nodded and continued her work, knowing that Zilani synthetic medicine worked well for Zilani patients but often failed catastrophically when treating other species. The medical bay's success came from Kate's ability to understand how different alien biologies interacted with various treatments. That knowledge was walking away with her, one encrypted file at a time. On the agricultural world of New Harmony, Farmer Rick Taylor stood in his fields watching the harvest machines work through the night. The planet fed 17 different species. Across 6 star systems, its specially modified crops providing nutrition that each alien race could properly digest. The methane breathers of Titan 7, who governed the world, had no idea how complex the agricultural process actually was. "The soil treatment is complete," said Jenny Miller, the planet's agricultural scientist. She was running final tests on the chemical composition of the farmland. "The crops will continue growing normally for about 10 months after we leave." Rick looked out over the vast fields that stretched to the horizon. "And after that?" "The soil will become barren within a year," Jenny replied matter-of-factly. "The methane breathers think it's all about putting seeds in the ground and adding water. They don't understand the biological systems that keep the soil healthy. The harvest machines worked faster than they ever had before, pulling in record amounts of food that would be shipped across the galaxy. The methane breathers were pleased with the efficiency, assuming that human farmers had finally learned to work properly. They didn't realize that Rick and his team were extracting everything the soil could produce before it lost the ability to grow anything at all. Transfer orders came through for the Henderson family and the Wilson crew, Jenny said, checking her communication device. That leaves us with just essential personnel for the final 3 months. Rick nodded and watched another transport ship rise from the planet's surface, officially carrying agricultural supplies to other worlds. In reality, it carried human families and all their possessions, heading for destinations that weren't listed. In any galactic database. Captain Sue Parker guided her merchant vessel Terra's Pride through the busy shipping lanes around the industrial world of Forge Prime. Her ship was one of hundreds of human-operated vessels that kept galactic trade flowing, carrying goods between species that often refused to deal directly with each other. Humans had become the galaxy's middlemen, trusted by all sides precisely because no one considered them important enough to scheme against. Final delivery to the Korthek station, announced her navigator, Pete Johnson. After this, we're officially reassigned to Outer Rim freight runs. Sue smiled as she watched the massive Korthek industrial platform grow larger on her view screen. Make sure all the human crew on other ships know about the new opportunities opening up in the outer systems. Good pay, better working conditions, and chances for advancement. The message would spread through the informal network of human traders and ship crews that connected every corner of the galaxy. To alien observers, it would look like humans were simply following better job opportunities. No one would suspect that those outer rim opportunities were actually positions in hidden, human colonies that were preparing for complete independence from galactic civilization. The Kortheks seem happy with our shipping services, Pete observed as they approached the docking bay. They're talking about expanding their trade routes. They'll need to find new shipping companies soon, Sue replied, though she kept her voice neutral. I hear human shipping firms are consolidating their operations. Might be less capacity available for long-distance routes in the coming months. The docking procedure went smoothly, as it always did with human crews. The Korthek appreciated human reliability and efficiency, though they assumed it came from humans being naturally suited for simple, repetitive work. They never realized that human success in trade came from understanding the complex relationships between different species and knowing how to navigate cultural differences that often led to conflicts. As Terra's Pride departed from Forge Prime, for the last time, Sue looked back at the industrial platform through her rear view screen. In a few months, the Korthak would be scrambling to find replacement shipping services. They would discover that very few other species were willing to deal with Korthak industrial materials, which were considered toxic by most galactic standards. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds and stations. Human doctors transferred to Earth projects. Human engineers took better positions in the Outer Rim. Human farmers moved to expanded agricultural programs, and human traders shifted to new shipping routes. To alien observers, it looked like normal job turnover, perhaps a bit higher than usual, but nothing worth investigating. The Galactic Council received scattered reports about human personnel changes, but dismissed them as typical human disorganization. Some administrators were mildly annoyed by the staffing disruptions, but most assumed they could easily replace human workers with members of their own species or with automated systems. None of them realized that humanity wasn't just changing jobs, they were preparing to disappear entirely, taking with them decades of knowledge and expertise that the galaxy had never bothered to properly understand or appreciate. The silent exodus had begun, and by the time anyone noticed what was really happening, it would be far too late to stop it. 2 years had passed since the last human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the first signs of trouble were beginning to show across the galaxy like cracks in a dam that was starting to fail. The problems started small, easy to dismiss as minor technical difficulties or temporary setbacks. But as months turned into years, those small problems began to grow into something much more serious. Administrator Zekthula of the Korthak Trade Federation stood in the waste processing center of Nexus Prime Station, staring at the rows of biorecycling units that had kept the massive space station running for decades. The organic waste from thousands of different species needed careful processing to prevent toxic buildup that could kill entire sections of the station. For 30 years, the system had worked flawlessly under human supervision. The efficiency ratings have dropped by 40% over the past 6 months, reported tech specialist Morden, his mechanical voice grinding with frustration. The biorecyclers are rejecting organic matter that they used to process without problems. Zekthul examined the readouts on his datapad, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The human engineers who had designed and maintained the system had made it look simple, but now that they were gone, the Korthak were discovering how complex the biological components actually were. "Have we tried running full diagnostic scans?" Zekthul asked, though he already knew the answer. "Multiple times," Morden replied. "The mechanical systems show no faults. The problem appears to be with the organic processing elements, but our technical manuals contain no information about maintaining biological components." The truth was that the human engineers had never written down their maintenance procedures because they had used intuition and experience to keep the biorecyclers working. They could sense when the organic cultures needed adjustment, when the bacterial colonies were becoming unbalanced, and when the entire system needed the kind of delicate care that no technical manual could properly describe. "Contact the human Colonial Authority," Zekthul ordered. "Offer them a consulting contract to fix the recycling systems." Morden's mechanical form seemed to slump slightly. "We have tried repeatedly to contact human authorities. All communication channels return automated messages stating that human technical services are no longer available for non-human installations." Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Dr. Veltar of the Zelani Empire faced a crisis that made waste processing problems seem trivial. A plague had broken out among the crystalline collective's mining colonies, spreading through their shared consciousness network faster than anyone had anticipated. The disease attacked the neural pathways that allowed the collective to think as one mind, leaving individual crystalline beings confused and frightened. "Our synthetic treatments have proven completely ineffective," Dr. Veltar reported to the Zelani High Command through his communication crystal. "The pathogen appears to be biological in nature, something our medical technology was not designed to combat." The response from High Command crackled through the crystal with obvious frustration. "The crystalline collective represents our largest trading partner in the Outer Rim. Their mining operations supply materials essential to our manufacturing systems. Find a solution immediately." Dr. Veltar had been trying to find a solution for weeks, but every approach led to the same dead end. The Zelani had spent centuries perfecting synthetic medicine that worked flawlessly for their own crystalline biology, but the organic pathogen followed rules that their technology couldn't understand or predict. "We need access to human medical databases," Dr. Veltar explained. Their biological research included extensive studies of cross-species disease transmission. "Without that data, we are working blindly." "Then access their databases," High Command replied with the tone of beings who expected simple problems to have simple solutions. "The human medical databases have been encrypted and removed from all galactic networks," Dr. Veltar said quietly. "The few human medical personnel remaining in our territory claim they no longer have access to the research files." The silence from High Command stretched for several minutes before the response came. "Find another way." But Dr. Veltar was beginning to suspect that there might not be another way, at least not one that his people could discover quickly enough. To save the crystalline collective from total collapse on the industrial world of Forge Prime, the Vorthan hegemony was discovering their own version of the same problem. Their massive mining operations on 17 different worlds had ground to a halt as critical equipment failed in ways that defied logical explanation. The Vorthan prided themselves on their systematic approach to problem-solving, but the mining equipment seemed to break down in patterns that made no sense. Chief Engineer Gerthak stood before a massive drilling platform that had stopped working 3 days earlier. The machine's diagnostic systems reported that all components were functioning within normal parameters, but the drill refused to penetrate the planet's surface beyond a certain depth. The quantum resonance chambers show optimal energy flow, reported his assistant, Sub-Engineer Cleven. The molecular disruption fields are operating at peak efficiency. According to all measurements, the drilling platform should be working perfectly. Gerthak examined the drilling site where the massive machine had simply stopped making progress. The human engineers who had previously maintained the equipment would have known what to do, but they had vanished along with all the other human workers, leaving behind only technical manuals that seemed to miss crucial details. The previous human maintenance teams kept extensive logs, Cleven continued, but their reports contained numerous references to intuitive adjustments and field experience modifications that are not explained in any detail. The Vorthan approach to engineering was based on precise calculations and logical procedures, but the mining equipment had been designed to work with biological intuition that could sense problems before they showed up on diagnostic scans. Without that human touch, the machines were failing in ways that no amount of logic could predict or prevent. On the agricultural world of New Harmony, the crisis was taking a different but equally devastating form. The methane breathers of Titan 7 had celebrated record harvests for months after the human farmers departed, congratulating themselves on finally achieving proper efficiency from their agricultural operations. But as the seasons changed, their celebration turned to growing panic. Administrator Shidek floated through the vast fields that had once fed 17 different species across 6 star systems. The crops were still growing, but something fundamental had changed. The plants looked healthy to casual observation, but detailed analysis revealed that they were producing food with dramatically reduced nutritional value. The soil composition has changed in ways we do not understand, reported agricultural specialist VSSMOR, his gas-filled communication chamber bubbling with agitation. The chemical analysis shows that essential nutrients are missing from the crops. Shtek examined samples of grain that looked identical to the food that had sustained galactic trade for decades. But when the grain was processed and tested, it proved inadequate for most alien species. The crystalline collective couldn't digest it properly, the Korthik found it toxic, and even the hardy Vorthan reported health problems after consuming it. The human farmers maintained extensive biological systems in the soil, Vimmer explained. We assumed these were simple fertilization procedures, but the systems appear to have been far more complex than our records indicate. The truth was that human farmers had been managing an intricate ecosystem that involved hundreds of different bacterial colonies, fungal networks, and organic processes that worked together to create soil capable of producing nutritionally complete food for dozens of alien species. The methane breathers had observed the surface activities of farming, without understanding the biological foundation that made it all possible. In the corridors of galactic power, the Galactic Defense Fleet was facing its own quiet crisis. Commander Hergath reviewed reports of increasing pirate activity throughout the Outer Rim territories, noting patterns that disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The pirates were using tactics that seemed to anticipate every move the Defense Fleet made. They appear to know our standard response procedures, reported Intelligence Officer Dexler. Every time we deploy forces to counter their activities, they have already moved to different targets using strategies we did not anticipate. Hergath studied the tactical displays showing pirate movements across multiple star systems. For decades, the Defense Fleet had relied on human tactical advisors who brought unpredictable thinking to military planning. Their chaotic approach to strategy had kept enemy forces guessing and prevented the kind of predictable patterns that smart opponents could exploit. Our tactical planning has become too systematic, Hergath realized with growing alarm. We are following logical procedures that any competent enemy can predict and counter. Should we attempt to contact human military advisors? Dexler suggested. Human military personnel are no longer accepting contracts with non-human organizations. Horgath replied, repeating the same response that officials across the galaxy were hearing. We must find solutions using our own resources. But as pirate attic 4 years had passed since humanity walked away from galactic civilization, and the galaxy was falling apart faster than anyone had imagined possible. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for centuries were collapsing. Entire species were facing extinction from diseases that synthetic medicine couldn't cure, and industrial systems were failing in cascading breakdowns that spread from world to world like a plague of incompetence. Ambassador Thelanara of the Unified Sectors stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Council, her normally composed features showing the strain of months spent dealing with crisis after crisis. Behind her, the massive display screens showed the scope of the disaster in stark numerical terms. Agricultural output down 70%. Interspecies trade reduced to less than half its previous levels, and medical emergencies increasing exponentially across civilized space. The situation has moved beyond critical, Thelanara announced to the assembled delegates. We must locate the human population and negotiate their return to galactic society. Our survival may depend on it. The chamber buzzed with the sounds of various species expressing discomfort with this admission. For 4 years, most delegates had insisted that the problems were temporary, technical difficulties that advanced civilizations could solve without help from primitive humans. Now reality was forcing them to confront a truth that wounded their collective pride. Admiral Zorkith of the Galactic Defense Fleet rose from his command platform, his massive form dominating the speaking area. My fleet stands ready to begin the search operations. However, we must acknowledge that this will not be a simple task. Human ship signatures have vanished from all known space lanes, and their colonies appear to have been systematically abandoned. The search fleet that assembled at Nexus Prime Station represented the largest cooperative military effort in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species, equipped with the most advanced detection equipment their civilizations could provide, prepared to comb through every system where humans had ever established a presence. The fleet included Zelani medical vessels hoping to find biological research data, Korthic industrial ships looking for maintenance expertise, and Vorthan engineering platforms seeking the intuitive problem-solving that only humans seem to possess. We begin with the Outer Rim colonies, Admiral Zorkith announced to his mixed crew of officers from across the galaxy. Human expansion followed predictable patterns for centuries. We will trace their movements through known space and determine where they might have gone. The first systems they searched yielded disturbing discoveries. Human colonies that had thrived for generations stood empty but perfectly preserved, as if their inhabitants had simply vanished into space. On the world of Haven's Rest, the search team found a settlement that looked like it could have been abandoned yesterday, with power systems still running and living areas that showed no signs of struggle or disaster. Dr. Veltar led the medical team through the abandoned hospital facilities, his crystalline form reflecting the artificial lights as he examined equipment that could solve the plague crisis consuming the crystalline collective. The medical systems are intact and operational, he reported through his communication device. But all the activation codes have been removed and the research databases are completely encrypted. Engineer Gerthek of the Vorthan hegemony studied the industrial facilities with growing frustration. The humans had left behind manufacturing equipment that was more advanced than anything his people currently used, but without the operational knowledge to run it, the machinery was useless. They have removed all technical documentation, he reported. The equipment appears functional, but we cannot determine how to operate it safely. What the search team didn't realize was that they were seeing the result of decades of careful planning. The humans hadn't abandoned their colonies in panic or haste, but had methodically prepared each settlement for evacuation while ensuring that no useful information would fall into alien hands. Every computer system had been wiped. Every technical manual had been encrypted beyond breaking, and even the basic maintenance procedures for essential equipment had been removed or deliberately obscured. The search continued through system after system, each abandoned human settlement telling the same story. The inhabitants had left voluntarily and systematically, taking with them not just their physical possessions, but all the knowledge and expertise that had made human colonies successful. Food production facilities stood empty with their biological systems carefully destroyed. Mining operations showed signs of deliberate sabotage that would take years to repair, and research installations had been stripped of everything except the basic infrastructure. They have been planning this withdrawal for far longer than we realized, Admiral Zorkith reported back to the Galactic Council. The evacuation was not an emotional response to the Council rejection, but the execution of a plan that must have been in development for decades. The search fleet pressed deeper into space, following electromagnetic signatures and quantum drive trails that led them through dead systems and forgotten regions of the galaxy. Each clue brought them closer to understanding the scope of humanity's departure, but farther from actually finding any living humans who might be willing to help solve the growing crisis. On the remote mining station of Kepler 442b, the search team found evidence of the systematic approach that humans had used throughout their withdrawal. The crystalline collective facility was still operational, but the sophisticated extraction equipment was failing in ways that defied explanation. Danny Wright and his human team had extracted every valuable mineral they could reach, but they had also destabilized the entire mining operation so thoroughly that continued extraction was impossible without completely rebuilding the facility. The humans removed not just the valuable resources, but also the stabilizing elements that kept the mining tunnels from collapsing, reported the Crystalline Collective representative through their shared consciousness network. They understood our industrial systems better than we understood them ourselves. The agricultural world of New Harmony presented an even more disturbing picture. The methane breathers who governed the planet watched helplessly as their food production systems continued to deteriorate. The soil that had once produced crops capable of feeding dozens of different species was becoming barren despite their best efforts to maintain the farming operations. The human farmers were not simply growing crops, agricultural specialist V.S. Moore reported to the search fleet. They were maintaining a complex biological ecosystem that we never understood. Without their knowledge, the soil itself is dying. As the search continued, a pattern began to emerge that filled the alien searchers with growing dread. Humans hadn't just left galactic civilization. They had systematically removed every trace of the knowledge and expertise that had made their participation valuable. They had pulled out the foundation stones of galactic society so carefully and completely that most species hadn't noticed until the entire structure began to collapse. The search fleet reached the edge of known space, following traces of human activity into regions that no galactic survey had ever properly mapped. The quantum signatures led them through cosmic dust clouds and around gravitational anomalies, following a trail that seemed to lead toward the empty space between galaxies. The drive signatures are consistent with human faster-than-light technology, reported Navigation Officer Keshtal, but they are using propulsion methods that we do not recognize. The energy patterns suggest capabilities far beyond what we believed human science had achieved. At the very edge of their sensor range, the search fleet detected a single human vessel moving through the void between star systems. Admiral Zorketh ordered an intercept course, hoping finally to make contact with someone who could provide answers about humanity's whereabouts and intentions. The human ship was small and unremarkable, the kind of courier vessel that had carried messages and small cargo throughout the galaxy for decades. As the search fleet approached, the human captain opened communication channels and appeared on their screens with a friendly smile that somehow made the situation feel even more hopeless. Captain Steve Hamilton looked exactly like the kind of ordinary human that most galactic species had dismissed as unimportant for centuries. His uniform was simple, his manner was polite, and his expression showed no signs of anger or resentment toward the massive alien fleet that had tracked him across half the galaxy. "Greetings," Steve said through the translation system. "I'm Captain Hamilton of the courier vessel New Dawn. How can I help you today?" Admiral Zorketh leaned forward on his command platform, trying to project authority despite the desperation. that drove his mission. We are searching for the human population. The Galactic Council wishes to establish communication regarding the current crisis affecting civilized space. Steve's expression remained pleasantly neutral. I'm afraid I'm just a simple courier, Admiral. I transport messages in small packages between remote outposts. I don't have any information about population movements or political matters. Dr. Veltar stepped forward, his crystalline for. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from galactic civilization, and the message that arrived at the Galactic Council chambers came from a distance that should have been impossible to cross. The transmission originated from beyond the edge of the galaxy itself, carrying data signatures that indicated a journey of over 2 million light-years through the empty void between galaxies. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with representatives from every surviving species, though many seats remained empty where civilizations had collapsed entirely without human support. The chamber that had once buzzed with the confident voices of advanced species now felt hollow and desperate, filled with beings who had finally learned what it meant to lose something. Irreplaceable. Ambassador Thelanara stood before the massive communication array as technicians worked frantically to decode the incoming transmission. The signal was weak but clear, carrying more information than any single message in galactic history. When the image finally resolved on the main display screen, the chamber fell into stunned silence. A human woman appeared on the screen, standing in what looked like a government office with large windows that showed a city stretching to the horizon. Under an alien sky, she wore simple but professional clothing, and her expression was calm and composed as she looked directly into the camera. Behind her, the windows revealed architecture that blended human design with completely unfamiliar alien influences. "Greetings to our former galactic neighbors," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I am President Mary Stewart of the Human Colonial Federation, transmitting from our capital city of New Terra in the Andromeda Galaxy." The chamber erupted in sounds of shock and disbelief from dozens of different species. The implications of her words hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity had not simply disappeared into the outer reaches of their own galaxy. They had somehow traveled to another galaxy entirely, a distance that galactic science considered impossible for any known technology. "We regret to inform you that humanity has established permanent residence in Andromeda," President Stewart continued, seemingly unaware of the chaos her words were causing in the council chamber. "We appreciate the lessons learned during our time in the Milky Way about the importance of self-reliance and the value of independence." Dr. Veltar of the Zilani Empire leaned forward in his viewing platform, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the display screen. Around him, the medical crisis that had consumed his people continued to worsen, with the crystalline collective facing complete extinction from diseases that Zilani synthetic medicine could not cure. The sight of a healthy, thriving human leader felt like a mockery of everything his civilization had lost. The image on the screen shifted to show another human, this one wearing what appeared to be a military uniform with insignia that none of the galactic representatives recognized. He stood before a massive window that revealed a fleet of ships unlike anything in Milky Way records, vessels that seemed to blend human engineering with technologies that looked completely alien. "I am Admiral Jack Miller of the Andromeda Defense Fleet," the man announced with quiet pride. "We are pleased to report that humanity has encountered 17 new species in our new home, and we have successfully established our first treaty negotiations based on principles of mutual respect and shared scientific collaboration." The words hit the assembled delegates like individual slaps across their faces. Mutual respect, shared scientific collaboration. These were concepts that the Milky Way galaxy had never offered to humanity, dismissing their contributions as primitive and limiting their participation to manual labor and basic resource extraction. Administrator Zekthul of the Korthek Trade Federation processed the implications with growing horror. His people's industrial systems were failing catastrophically without human maintenance expertise, and now he was learning that those same humans had somehow developed Technology advanced enough to cross the void between galaxies. The species they had dismissed as backwards had achieved something that Korthic science considered theoretically impossible. The transmission continued with a third human, a woman in what appeared to be scientific attire standing in a laboratory, filled with equipment that seemed to merge human biological sciences with alien technologies. The research facility visible behind her was larger and more advanced than anything the Milky Way had ever constructed. "I am Dr. Lisa Carter, director of the Andromedan Research Consortium," she said, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone whose work was finally being properly valued. "Our collaborative research with our new alien partners has produced breakthrough discoveries that combine human biological intuition with advanced technological applications." Behind Dr. Carter, the laboratory windows revealed a research complex that stretched for kilometers in every direction, filled with beings that moved and worked together in ways that spoke of genuine cooperation rather than the grudging tolerance that had characterized interspecies relations in the Milky Way. Our medical advances alone could address every disease and biological crisis currently affecting our former galaxy. Dr. Carter continued, though her tone remained matter-of-fact rather than boastful. The combination of human biological sciences with Andromedan nanotechnology has opened research possibilities that neither species could have achieved independently. The chamber filled with the sounds of various species expressing despair in their native languages. The crystalline collective was dying from diseases that human medicine could cure. The Korthic industrial systems were collapsing without human engineering expertise, and agricultural worlds across the galaxy were facing starvation from soil, problems that human farmers could solve. All of these solutions existed, but they were now 2 million light-years away in the hands of people who had been driven away by the galaxy's own arrogance and prejudice. The final part of the transmission showed a fourth human, a woman wearing diplomatic robes that incorporated design elements from multiple alien cultures. She stood in what appeared to be a meeting hall filled with representatives from various species, all of whom seemed to be participating as equals in some kind of governmental session. "I am Ambassador Chen Wei, representing the Andromedan Collective," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who spoke for a truly cooperative civilization. "The Collective is an alliance of human and alien species working together based on the recognition that every form of intelligence and every approach to problem-solving has inherent value." The contrast with the Galactic Council's approach to interspecies relations was painfully obvious. Where the Milky Way had created a hierarchy that placed some species above others, the Andromedan Collective seemed to operate on principles of genuine equality and mutual respect. "We extend this transmission not to express anger or resentment toward our former neighbors," Ambassador Chung continued, "but to offer a lesson that we learned through difficult experience. True civilization requires recognizing and nurturing the potential in all beings, regardless of whether their contributions fit predetermined expectations or established hierarchies." President Stewart returned to the screen for the final portion of the message, her expression showing neither triumph nor bitterness, but something far more devastating: simple professional courtesy toward former associates, who were no longer relevant to her people's future. "For any representatives of Milky Way civilizations who wish to establish diplomatic contact, we have included coordinates for a neutral meeting point in the space between our galaxies," she said. "We are willing to discuss formal diplomatic relations, but only on the basis of genuine mutual respect and recognition of equal status for all participating species." The transmission included detailed star charts showing the location of the proposed meeting point, along with specifications for the kind of faster-than-light technology that would be required to make the journey. The technical requirements were so far beyond current galactic capabilities that reaching the meeting point would require decades of technological development that most species no longer had the resources to pursue. "We hope that our former neighbors will use this time to consider the lessons of our shared history," President Stewart concluded. "The Andromedan Collective stands as proof that different species can work together successfully when each member is valued for their unique contributions rather than limited by others' narrow expectations." The transmission ended with a final image of New Terra's skyline, showing a city that clearly represented the successful merger of human and alien architectural styles. The buildings rose toward an alien sky in designs that no single species could have conceived, testament to the kind of genuine collaboration that the Milky Way had never achieved. As the display screen faded to black, the Galactic Council chamber remained silent for several minutes. The implications of what they had witnessed were too enormous and too devastating for immediate comprehension. Humanity had not simply left their galaxy, they had succeeded beyond all imagination in their new home, creating the kind of cooperative civilization that the Milky Way had never managed to build.